February 1971. Edgar Mitchell floats 240,000 miles from home, suspended in the command module of Apollo 14. Earth hangs like a blue marble in infinite darkness. The moon looms silent and ancient beside him. And then, the radio goes quiet. No mission control chatter, no mechanical hum, no sound at all. Just Mitchell, alone with the cosmos, wrapped in a silence so complete it seemed to have weight. What happened next changed everything he thought he knew about reality. In that profound quiet, Mitchell experienced what he could only describe as cosmic consciousness. The boundaries between self and universe dissolved. He wasn't observing space, he was participating in it. The silence didn't isolate him from existence. It revealed his place within it. Mitchell spent the rest of his life trying to understand that moment. What did he encounter in the soundless void between worlds? The same thing waiting for you in your next moment of genuine silence. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us are running from that encounter. When did you last sit in complete silence? Not the muted quiet of a library, not the hushed whispers before sleep. I'm talking about absolute, uncompromising silence, when the only sound is your own heartbeat and the weight of your thoughts pressing against your consciousness. If you're like most people, the answer is you can't remember, and there's a reason for that. Dr. Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia discovered something unsettling about our relationship with silence. In his famous 2014 study, he gave participants a choice: sit alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes or give themselves painful electric shocks. The results? 67% of men and 25% of women chose to shock themselves rather than be alone with their minds. Think about that. We would rather experience physical pain than encounter the silence within ourselves. Wilson called it the challenge of the unengaged mind, but I call it what it really is: terror of who we might discover when the noise stops. Because here's what we intuitively know but refuse to admit. Silence doesn't just reveal thoughts, it reveals the thinker, and most of us aren't ready for that introduction. As Jean-Paul Sartre described it, when the noise falls away, you don't just hear silence, you hear freedom, raw and terrifying. Picture this: you're sitting in a cafe, the conversations blur into background noise, your phone lies silent on the table. Suddenly, you become acutely aware that you exist, not as a role, not as an identity, but as pure consciousness choosing moment by moment what to become. Sartre called this the nausea of freedom, that overwhelming moment when you realize you are completely responsible for creating meaning in an apparently meaningless universe. In silence, there are no excuses, no distractions, no roles to hide behind, just you choosing what to become. And you've felt this, haven't you? That vertigo when the noise stops and you're left face to face with your own freedom. Camus saw it differently. For him, silence revealed not despair, but beauty, the absurd gap between our need for answers and the universe's indifferent quiet, embraced with rebellious joy. In the silence between question and answer, we become fully, defiantly human. And Wittgenstein reminded us, where words fail, silence speaks. Beyond language lies a realm that can only be encountered, never explained. That's the silence that scares us most, the one that shows us we're free. But let's move from philosophy to the firing patterns of neurons. What actually happens in your brain when you encounter silence? Dr. Marcus Rachel at Washington University made a discovery in 2001 that revolutionized neuroscience. He found that when we're not actively focused on the outside world, our brains don't shut down. They fire up what he termed the default mode network, a constellation of brain regions that becomes intensely active during rest. This wasn't what anyone expected. The prevailing assumption was that an unstimulated brain would be a quiet brain. Instead, Rachel discovered the opposite. The resting brain consumes almost as much energy as the active brain. But what is this network actually doing? Dr. Judson Brewer at Yale University spent years mapping its activity. He discovered that the default mode network does something extraordinary. It constructs what neuroscientists call the narrative self. It's constantly weaving together memories, emotions, and experiences into the ongoing story you tell yourself about who you are. Here's the fascinating part. People who regularly practice silence, through meditation, contemplative prayer, or simple stillness, show dramatically different default mode network activity. Dr. Sarah Lazar at Massachusetts General Hospital used brain imaging to study long-term meditators. What she found was remarkable. Their brains showed increased gray matter density in areas associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation. But more intriguing was what happened to their default mode network. Instead of the usual chaotic chatter, it showed increased connectivity and coherence. The network was still active, but it was organized around awareness itself rather than compulsive self-referential thinking. In other words, silence literally rewires your brain to know itself more clearly. But perhaps the most revealing research came from the sensory deprivation experiments of the 1950s and 60s. Dr. John Lilly, a neuroscientist at the National Institute of Mental Health, created the first isolation tank, a lightless, soundless chamber filled with salt water heated to body temperature. The expectation, that absence of stimulation would create a blank mental state. The reality, the mind turned inward with unprecedented intensity. Participants reported profound experiences, encounters with suppressed memories, bursts of creativity, and what many described as direct contact with deeper aspects of themselves. Some experienced what Lilly called consciousness without objects, pure awareness aware of itself. Dr. Peter Sudfeld at the University of British Columbia continued this research with what he termed restricted environmental stimulation therapy, REST. His findings were extraordinary. 90% of participants reported significant stress reduction, 65% showed improved problem-solving abilities, and many described lasting changes in self-awareness. The silence wasn't emptying their minds. It was revealing what had always been there beneath the noise. Long before we had brain scanners or laboratory equipment, human beings discovered something that science is only now beginning to understand. Silence is not empty space, it's sacred territory. Every major spiritual tradition found the same doorway, hidden in plain sight. In Buddhism, silence is where the illusion of separateness dissolves. The Buddha didn't achieve enlightenment through action or speech, but through sitting in profound stillness. In that silence, he discovered something startling. The self he thought he was protecting didn't actually exist. What remained was pure awareness, vast and unbound. Christian mystics called it the dark night of the soul, not because it was frightening, but because in that profound quiet, even the light of concepts and beliefs falls away. What emerges is direct communion with the divine. As one medieval contemplative wrote, God's first language is silence. Everything else is translation. Islamic Sufis perfected the practice of muraqabah, sitting in silence so complete that the boundary between seeker and sought disappears. They understood that beneath the constant chatter of the rational mind lies a deeper intelligence, accessible only through cultivated stillness. The poet Rumi captured it perfectly. Silence is the language of God, all else is poor translation. What were they all discovering in that sacred quiet? The same recognition that would later strike an astronaut floating in the vast silence of space, that you are not separate from what you're seeking. You are not a small self trying to connect with something greater. You are the greater, temporarily pretending to be small. Silence doesn't give you this recognition. It removes everything that obscures it. Here's where things become beautifully paradoxical. The more we study silence scientifically, philosophically, and within spiritual traditions, the more we realize it has nothing to do with the absence of sound. Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who brought mindfulness meditation to Western medicine, puts it this way: silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything. Think about it. You can sit in a soundproof room and still be mentally chaotic. Your thoughts can race, your emotions can churn, your attention can fragment in 1,000 directions. That's not silence, that's just quiet noise. But you can also experience profound silence in the middle of Times Square, when your attention becomes so unified, so present, that the background noise of both external and internal chatter becomes transparent. Eckhart Tolle describes this as the space between thoughts. It's not that thinking stops. It's that you discover the awareness in which all thinking appears. This is what Edgar Mitchell encountered floating between worlds. This is what the mystics found in their caves and monasteries. This is what your brain is trying to show you every time you feel that subtle urge to check your phone during a quiet moment. But silence doesn't just reveal who you are. It reveals a way of knowing that operates beyond ordinary thinking. Dr. Eugene Gendlin at the University of Chicago spent decades studying what he called felt sense, a bodily awareness that carries more information than conceptual thinking. His research showed that people who could access this subtle intelligence were more successful in therapy, more creative in problem-solving, and more accurate in their intuitive assessments. This intelligence only emerges in stillness. It's too subtle to compete with the loud voice of analytical thought. Albert Einstein called it the intuitive mind, a sacred gift that he believed modern education was systematically destroying. Steve Jobs spoke of beginner's mind, approaching problems with the openness that only comes from not knowing. Dr. John Cunios at Drexel University studied the neuroscience of insight, those aha moments when solutions appear suddenly from nowhere. His brain imaging revealed something remarkable. Insights don't come from increased thinking. They come from a momentary quieting of the analytical mind, creating space for what he calls remote associations to emerge. The silence doesn't give you new information. It reveals connections that were always there, but were obscured by mental noise. So how do you meet silence in a world designed to prevent it? Not through grand gestures or mystical retreats, not through perfect conditions or special techniques. You meet it in the spaces between. The pause before you reach for your phone, the breath between thoughts, the moment of stillness before you speak. Try this. The next time you're waiting, for coffee, for an elevator, for anything, resist the impulse to fill the space. Instead, just be there. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice your breathing. Let your attention rest on the simple fact of being alive in this moment. That's it. No mantras, no special postures, just conscious participation in the pause between activities. Or consider this. When you wake up tomorrow, before you check your phone, before you plan your day, before you become anyone in particular, lie there for 30 seconds and listen. Not to the sounds outside, but to the quality of awareness that's already awake, already present, already complete. You can find silence in the middle of conversation by listening not just to words, but to the space from which they arise. You can find it walking without destinations. You can find it in the gap between wanting something and reaching for it. The silence isn't hiding from you. You're hiding from it. In that moment of meeting, you're not just passing time. You're practicing presence. You're remembering who you are beneath all the noise. But why is this so difficult? Remember those people who chose electric shocks rather than sit alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. We're not just avoiding boredom, we're avoiding revelation. Because here's what silence does. It stops participating in the stories you tell yourself about who you are. Most of our mental energy goes toward maintaining a carefully edited version of ourselves. We constantly adjust reality to fit our self-image, filtering out what doesn't match our preferred narrative. But silence doesn't collaborate in this editing process. Silence reveals your actual emotional state beneath the stories you tell yourself. It shows you your unconscious habits of thought. It exposes the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are in this moment. This can be deeply unsettling. In silence, you might encounter aspects of yourself you'd rather avoid. Unprocessed grief, suppressed anger, deep loneliness, existential anxiety. These experiences aren't pleasant, but they're real, and they're yours. The alternative, constant stimulation, perpetual distraction, endless noise, doesn't make these aspects of yourself disappear. It just drives them underground, where they influence your behavior in unconscious ways. Silence brings them into the light, where they can be met with awareness and compassion. But here's the profound paradox. The very thing we're running from, our authentic self, is not the small, limited, anxious identity we're trying to protect. What silence ultimately reveals is that you are the awareness in which all of these experiences appear and disappear. You are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not even your sense of self. You are the space in which all of this unfolds. Perhaps this is why choosing silence requires a particular kind of courage, not the dramatic courage of heroic action, but the quiet courage of radical honesty. This is the ultimate vulnerability, the willingness to meet yourself without filters, without excuses, without escape routes, to sit with what is rather than what you wish were true. In our productivity-obsessed culture, this can feel revolutionary. We're told that every moment must be optimized, every experience must be shared, every thought must be processed into content. Silence refuses this logic. It insists that some experiences are too precious to be commodified, too deep to be shared, too sacred to be measured. To choose silence is to choose depth over distraction, presence over busyness, authenticity over performance. It's to recognize that in a world obsessed with having more, knowing more, and doing more, the most radical thing you can do is to simply be, fully, completely, without reservation. This brings us back to Edgar Mitchell floating in the cosmic quiet. What he discovered in that silence wasn't new information about the universe. It was recognition of his fundamental connection to everything that exists. Decades of consciousness research reveal something extraordinary. Profound experiences of silence often dissolve the boundaries between individual and universal awareness. The silence didn't give Mitchell something he didn't have. It revealed something he had never lost. This is the ultimate teaching of silence. You are not a separate being observing the universe from the outside. You are the universe becoming conscious of itself through the particular focal point of your individual awareness. So the next time you find yourself reaching for distraction in a quiet moment, pause. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What might be revealed if I stay present to this stillness? The answer might surprise you, because silence isn't empty. It's pregnant with everything you've been too busy to notice. Your own aliveness, your inherent wholeness, your natural wisdom, your authentic self beneath all the layers of conditioning and social programming. Research shows that even 8 weeks of learning to be comfortable with silence can produce measurable changes in brain structure, immune function, and overall well-being. But the most profound change isn't measurable. It's the recognition that you are not the small, limited, anxious identity you've been trying to protect. You are the vast, aware, unshakable presence in which all experience arises and dissolves. Because in the end, that's what silence reveals. Not who you think you are, but who you have always been beneath all the noise. To hear it, you have to be willing to listen. To listen, you have to be willing to be silent. Because in the end, you are not separate from silence. You are silence becoming aware of itself.